Activation warning. This episode contains explicit and graphic descriptions of suicide, self-harm, sexual assault, and rape. Discretionary caution and action is required. This episode is not for children. Please use extreme self-care in listening to this episode and seek immediate help through the National Suicide Hotline by dialing 988 if you are emotionally activated or triggered by the content of this episode. Or if you are activated and need help from the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, call 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-4673. Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. This is episode 88. And this week, I'm privileged to have as my guest Laurie McBride, a St. George licensed clinical social worker who is the owner and director of Evolving Light Counseling. Laurie specializes in addiction recovery, resiliency, aging, trauma, and PTSD recovery, successfully utilizing a variety of verified therapies. She joined me for a conversation not only about her counseling services, but also to share her experiences of being sexually assaulted as a child and during her high school years. Laurie is not only a survivor, but is thriving through her healing journey. I invited Laurie to be on this show because I believe that you will relate to her on multiple levels. So let's get to it. Here's Laurie. Laurie McBride, welcome to the Sexual Assault Survivor Stories podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me. Laurie is with me in the studio today. She's a local licensed clinical social worker. And I know Laurie through a mutual friend. And because of that person telling me about Laurie, I got very excited about the prospect of having her on the show. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Laurie, why don't you start off by just telling the audience about yourself, your background, your education, what it is you do, the clients you work with, that kind of thing.
Okay. I was born and raised in Salt Lake until I was about 15. And I had the experience growing up of a mom who was not emotionally available to me, and I was not her favorite anyway. And I was a problem child because I had a lot of illnesses, and that was annoying to her. And she was a nurse, and so her kids shouldn't be getting sick. It was an interesting family to grow up in. I had some emotional neglect, some emotional abuse. And of course, it changed the way I view the world. I was molested as a child by one of my brothers, and that was hard. It taught me something that I didn't realize for many, many years until I went to school and started getting my degrees, and things started coming together like puzzle pieces. And then I could see the lessons that are learned through abuse. I had a young man twice in high school. A couple of guys tried to rape me, and I was able to talk my way out of it both times. One time, this football player was giving me a ride home because I lived out in the boonies, and pulled under a highway bridge on a deserted stretch of the road and was trying to rape me. And he was way bigger than me, and I was little. I weighed about 112 pounds. And as I figured out quickly that I couldn't do my buttons up as fast as he could undo them, it occurred to me to tell him, yeah, you're probably right. This should be okay. The doctor said to wait a week, but it's been 3 days. And he stopped. It took him a minute, but when that absorbed, he stopped what he was doing. He says, "What do you mean?" I says, "Well, I've got this weird infection, and the doctor told me not to have sex for 7 to 10 days. But it's been 3 days. I should probably be okay." So he turned on the car and took me home. Another time in high school, I was with a group of people, and as we were dropping people off after our activity, it was a group activity, it came down to me and this other young man in the car. He pulled off somewhere off the side of the road and proceeded to try and take advantage of me. Well, I don't remember how I managed to get over to the driver's seat, but I kicked the car into gear. He'd left it running, and I hit the accelerator. And about the time we got to about 80 miles an hour on this dark, deserted road, he said, "You're going to kill us both." And I says, "Okay with me." And I kept pushing it, and around 90, 95, he backed off. And I stopped the car, jumped out, and ran like hell. But I think that these guys chose me partially because of what I had gone through as a child and how it had affected the way I presented myself. And I have learned that those of us who have been victimized, just like bunnies, predators can scent us. There is a way that we present that unless we're really aware and we've had some help, we send out those pheromones, whatever it is, and they pick up on it. And then going on from there, I married young because I wanted to be safe and protected. Married an abuser who was violently abusive as well as sexually abusive. And in the 6 years I was married to him, I was raped multiple times and violently abused. I ended up with a deviated septum, some cracked ribs. I'd been choked out a few times until I passed out. And I hadn't known much different than that, so for a long time I wasn't aware of how severe that abuse was until after I'd left the marriage. And he threatened to kill me and my kids, so I was like, I'm out of here. And I got away. But it wasn't until I'd done some training as a crisis response person that I realized that my abuse was extreme. I knew I'd been abused. I didn't realize there was levels, and mine was way high off the chart, and I was at a huge risk of being killed. I left that, and then it was survival, so I worked multiple jobs to raise my kids. After about 3 years, married someone else who abused me emotionally because I wasn't ever going to let anyone abuse me physically again. So I got abused emotionally. And finally, when my children were older and I was in a mostly secure marriage, I went to college to get a degree. Initially, I thought I wanted to be a teacher, and I got into my associate's degree courses and coursework and a little bit of teaching expertise and realized that I can't teach. I would end up doing harm to some of the parents. So I thought that was not a good place to go.
I get that.
And I shifted into nursing, and then my doctor told me because of my immune system, which was messed up from years of stress, that that wasn't a good area for me to be. So I shifted at that point into social work, which was something I had sworn I would never do because I don't like or trust people.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's one of the reasons, even though I have a degree in psychology, never wanted to go into clinical psychological work.
Exactly. And I did do my time in psychology. I actually had the weird distinction when I was at SUU getting my bachelor's, and my primary was social work. I had not chosen psychology for similar reasons. It sounds like that you did. There are real limitations on psychology, and I wanted that broader spectrum available to me. So social work was a good way to go.
Yeah.
And I got called in by the psychology department about 3 months before graduation. And I was told by the dean of the psychology department that I was their highest scoring student in psychology. And he was surprised to learn that I was not taking psychology as my major, and he tried to convince me to shift over. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. Psychology is very micro-oriented to the individual, and sociology is very oriented to the whole. And I'm very aware that you need a holistic approach to healing in life. So I did get my degree at SUU for that. I got my Associate of Arts at Dixie, went up to SUU for my bachelor's, and then I went to the University of Utah 12 years later to get my master's degree in social work. So I was an old lady by the time that got done.
Oh, that's hard to imagine since you're not an old lady now. So.
Well, I won't tell you how old I was when I graduated then. In my bachelor's, I went to work with my bachelor's degree and worked for over 12 years in nursing homes and in hospice. Hospice is what I did for 12 years. Wow. Prior to that, I was working in nursing homes, helping the staff and helping the clients and their families deal with the processes of aging and the trauma that comes with life changes. And so I was doing that, teaching as part of my job there. And I would sometimes tell patients and their families that at this point, when you're on hospice, your doctor's telling you that we can't cure this. My job is to heal you emotionally because we can't fix you physically. And my job is to get you to be okay with the life that you've lived and what's coming now so that you can have the best quality of life rather than quantity. And that was incredibly rewarding. And working with my teams and helping them understand, and working with my doctors and helping them understand, because they're treating the physical and I'm teaching them about all the rest. And that was a wonderful place to work. And then when I graduated with my master's degree, it opened a lot of doors for me. And I found myself in the last year of my master's degree, when you have to go and work somewhere in the field to get your degree, I got assigned to Southwest Center down here. My program advisor told me ISAT, which works with people who've been sexually abusive, or I could work for Southwest Center with people in drug and alcohol. And I thought, great, predators or junkies? I took the junkies because I was allergic to predators due to my experiences.
Yeah, of course.
So I went to Southwest Center and I found out that I love doing substance abuse work, that it was the opposite end of the spectrum, the same spectrum the hospice is on. Hospice is on resolving at the end of life, but substance abuse treatment is about beginning your life and rebirth. And I loved it. And to this day, I have a deep, deep love for recovery and helping people through the trauma and the negativity and the guilt and shame. And I love the 12 steps, and it's helped me in my life a lot. I learned so much. And I thought, we should be teaching a version of 12-step in junior high, because it's so applicable to having a healthy life. It doesn't have anything to do with substance abuse per se. It's about living a healthy life. And I was so impressed. And so I gobbled that up. Plus, I had flirted with some of that substance issues when I was a young single mom and overwhelmed and no self-esteem, which is what a lot of us do. Victims do. We tend to be drawn to substances as a way to block some of the pain. You might have started out partying like I did. It's just fun to hang out with your friends and party a little bit. But then as you get into it more seriously and you find yourself hiding things at home and having access to substances at home to self-medicate your feelings. And I walked very close to that line of addiction. And I think the only reason, I absolutely know I'm an alcoholic. I absolutely know that. I know that some of it is genetic. My dad's side of the family is all from Scotland.
There you go.
So I know some of it is genetic. I know from my sugar cravings and carb cravings and that kind of thing. And I did enjoy alcohol. But I was able to stop through kind of a fluke. I was living in a trailer park with my little boys back in the 70s, right near I-15, where it drives past West Valley City. Mm-hmm. and not far from the police station, and the fire station, thank God, because we're in this trailer court. And one night, and I was self-medicating at the time, after my kids would get to bed and everybody was sound asleep, I would use some Percocet and maybe a glass of wine so that I could just sleep and not have to feel anything and just sleep, because I had frequent PTSD nightmares, and they were pretty bizarre, weird nightmares. I went to a psychiatrist at the time hoping for help, and he had never heard of a nightmare like mine. And my nightmare was, this is hilarious, so I'll share it. I think it's so funny. Other people think, oh, that's awful. But I think it's hysterical. I would dream that I had woken up and was getting ready for work, and that I would get up for work. And I mean, I went through the whole day. I'd get ready for work, take the boys to the daycare, drive in, go through traffic, work all day, come out, go pick the boys up, come home. And as I walked in the door, there would be my body laying on the floor in my trailer. And I would realize that I had died and didn't even know it. So I just kept going.
Oh, my word. I'm going to agree with
That was a weird one.
your therapist that, I don't think I've ever heard of a dream like that. That's strange.
Well, I think what it was I was on my own. I didn't get child support. I worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time to support me and my 3 little boys. I was so much on my own.
Yeah.
And my mother had told me when I got married and started having children that don't expect me to take care of your kids. I've raised mine. So I was really on my own.
Yeah.
And everything that happened was on me. And so, I drank a little, and I liked my Percocet in the evenings. But one night when I was getting the boys ready for bed, I heard fire trucks coming and the alarms going off, and I looked out, and just a block down the street from me, kitty corner, I could see a trailer on fire. I could see the smoke coming out. And between the time that I saw that and I heard the trucks to the time where the trucks got there, unloaded, hooked up their hoses, it was in full blaze.
Sure.
Trailers burn very fast.
Yeah. I've been on the scene of multiple mobile homes that they go
just
up
go.
in 5 minutes. They're gone.
They're gone. And that really shocked me into an awakening that if I took a Percocet and had a drink when I went to bed, I wouldn't feel a thing. Even when my little boys were burning to death, I wouldn't wake up. And so it was that night that I went into the kitchen and I dumped all my booze and I threw away my Percocets because I was blessed. I've had a lot of angry addicts talking to me about this, about how, well, my addiction was so bad that I couldn't even stop for my kids. I get that. I respect that. I understand the disease. I was just fortunate enough that I wasn't so far gone that the thought of my kids burning to death because I was passed out was enough for me to quit. And it saved my life, and it might have saved theirs. So years later, go to school, get my degree, start working with addicts and alcoholics, realized I was one.
Yeah, that's an education right there, right?
It really was. It really was. It was such an eye-opener for me to go, wait a minute, this is me. I know how this works, you know? So that was awesome. And then I started combining my understanding of trauma and what I was learning in school and Bessel van der Kolk and some of the other great leaders out there in trauma and recovery. And I'm going, wait, this is me. Wait, this is me. And then I gained an even deeper insight to the full spectrum. And I actually took a year where I did a lot of therapy. And I'm going to be totally straight up and honest with you. I couldn't find a therapist that could work with me because they didn't get it. Yeah. So I work with 2 partners who I love and trust with my life. I would come to them with bits and pieces, and we would talk, and I would share with them what I was realizing. But basically, I therapized myself, which I don't recommend for anyone.
Yeah.
It was painful and it was hard.
And generally takes longer, and generally doesn't cover a lot of areas that need to be covered.
Exactly.
Because we, as the human brain and mind working in tandem often go into denial. And so it's hard to work.
Well, we have blinders on.
Yeah.
But God bless the researchers out there and the stuff I was reading. And then God bless my clients, because my clients taught me. And then I could see myself. And oh my gosh. I learned that everything in life is involved with economics, that there's a cost benefit to everything in our lives. Mm-hmm. Every decision we make is based on a cost benefit analysis that we do, that we're not even aware that we're doing.
Consciously or unconsciously, usually unconsciously.
Consciously or unconsciously, we are doing a cost benefit analysis. Mm-hmm. Do I want to go to this party? Cost benefit analysis. Are people going to be mad at me if I don't show up? Am I going to lose the opportunity to build a relationship that's important to me? Everything is cost-benefit analysis. What will I wear to work today? Is this going to present me with the opportunity to look professional and with it and on top of it? Or am I going to dress in a way that says I don't care and have that be noticed and affect me negatively? Everything is cost-benefit. That's one of the things that I learned first about recovery from anything. Whether it's a short-term trauma, a huge lifelong trauma, whether it's sexual trauma, whether it's emotional trauma, whatever it is, whether it's PTSD from the war, it's cost-benefit analysis. Yeah. And what we retain is what we think is true. Let me put it this way, and I'll use sexual abuse, but other people will relate to this as well. When we are young, and we are sexually abused as children in particular. I mean, this is really true of children, although it's also true of other stages of our life. When someone abuses us when we're very young, when we depend upon adults to keep us safe, when we need to feel like our needs are important and heard, because from the time we're infants, that's how our needs are met, is by adults. If we cry, they check us for pain or for wet diapers, or they feed us. And as we grow a little older, we're still constantly looking for that support. And when someone sexually abuses us as a child, we're taught some lessons. Everything that happens to us is a teaching moment. Everything. So one of the things we learn, one of two things that we learn, the first thing is that what we want doesn't matter, that we're not important, because I don't want this person touching me this way, whether it's a stranger, a family member, whoever it is. I'm uncomfortable and they don't care. So what I want is not important. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is I have something that people want, and it's my body. So I can use that to my advantage in the future. They might not care about what I want, but I can still use that to maybe get something I want. Cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
We do that. And that's the first two lessons that we learn when we're abused. I don't matter, but I have something that matters. And then as you get older and you start growing up, you become a teenager, you still carry that. I'm not important. I don't have value in and of myself. What I think, what I feel, no one gives a dang about. However, I have a weapon I can use. I have something that's of value. Mm-hmm. We also become very grateful when someone wants to like us, even if they only like us for what they can get. Initially, we're not aware of that. We're just so damn grateful. And we don't hold out for the really nice people that we bump into. We don't even take a shot at the really good relationships because we don't deserve them. We are dirty. We are unworthy. We have a lot of shame. And we blame ourselves. I might have been 5 years old when I was molested or younger, but somehow it was my fault.
Yeah. Very common.
And if I go talk to my mom about it, she's going to be angry with me because I allowed this to happen. And that was something that happened to me too when I left my first husband, who was violently abusive and tried to kill me and the kids. I called my mom finally because it was a rule of the shelter. I went to a shelter and you had to call and talk to someone safe in your life that might be able to help you, so a family member. So I sat with a therapist, and they had me call my mom and dad. And my mom got on the phone, and I explained to her what had been happening in the 6 years of my marriage. And the first thing out of her mouth after a moment of silence was, "What did you do to deserve it?" Just reinforcing that this was my fault, that I was the problem. I picked the wrong person, all on me. And I took that with me, and I learned that, as I'd been learning all my life, that I was the problem consistently. And the victims I work with feel the same way. Even the guys who come back from the war with PTSD, all my buddies died, but I didn't, survivor guilt. I'm the problem. Why didn't I save them? There was nothing they could have done. It was an IUD. It blew their tank up, but somehow it's their fault. Okay, so here's another thing about recovering from trauma. Sexual abuse, emotional abuse. We need a couple of things. One, we need to accept the fact that it's not our fault. No matter how stupid we were, even if we did something wrong, we can only do what we understand is the right thing to do, even if it's the wrong thing. We can only do what we know. And so most people, and this is shocking to those who don't feel this way, but most people in the world are doing the best they can with what they've been given, even the people who hurt us. And my mother was raised by people who were, she was 9th of 10 children. Dad was a farmer. Mom, it was a stay-at-home mom, but very strong woman. And everything was black and white. And God bless my mom. She was born a Virgo. So everything was black and white. And it's funny because I'm also a Virgo, but I'm the Mother Earth Virgo, where everything is different colors. So yeah, we did not get along, and she did not understand me. But yeah, that was my mom. She was doing the best she could based on how she was raised. And I had to accept that so that I could forgive and move on. And that's the problem with carrying this pain, wherever it comes from. We cannot move on until we accept that we're not in charge of everything. We're not God. It's not all our fault. And it's okay for things to just be a mess because we're not in charge. So I need that first one. I need people to have some self-acceptance and some self-awareness that it's not their fault. The second thing is the willingness to forgive themselves. No matter how hard you want to get better, you've got to be willing to forgive and let go. And if you will not let the past stay in the past, you will never get better. And I don't know how I picked up on this one, because this happened years back with my first husband, who was so violent. I realized that I'm not going to give him power over me. I'm not going to let him live rent-free in my head. Yes, he abused me. And yeah, it was probably my fault, was how I felt at the time, because I married him. And then I stayed with him while he was beating the crap out of me and threatening my life and keeping tabs on me every minute that he could. And I didn't have access to a car, and I didn't have access to the bank accounts, even though I'm working and all my money goes into the joint account. It was my fault. So as long as we hang on to those things, that self-blame, as long as we hang on to that trauma and we remain victims, we don't get better. No one gets better until you can let go and admit it's not your fault. You've got to let go and let the past be the past.
Laurie, there are some brains that can't do that, that are, I think there's a book about it. I can't remember who wrote it now. I think it's called The Science of Stuck.
Mm-hmm. I think I've heard of the book. I have not read it.
Yeah, I have, but it's been almost a year. That mentality and those issues can take decades to get past, and sometimes doesn't ever happen. But there are, for a lack of better word, consolations or compromises that we make with ourselves.
Exactly.
What's your view, and how do you look at those people who are stuck, and what is the treatment from your perspective on how to get people past that stuck stage?
Well, as you said, some people never do. It's like people in recovery. Not everyone recovers, which is obvious in the death data that we get all the time, how many people are dying from overdoses and this kind of thing.
Or suicide.
Or suicide.
As a result of,
Guilt,
I'm never going to get well.
Guilt, shame, I'm just a horrible person, the world would be better off without me, all of that. Yeah, exactly. Some people don't have the time or the opportunity or the support systems or the access to care to get better. As I've worked with people, though, I always try and find out a couple of things. One, do you have a higher power? Do you have any connection with a God or a higher power, the universe, nature? Do you have anything like that? Because I can use that to help them. Another thing that's great, and I love it, do you have kids? Because I'll ask them, do you remember when your child was 5? If someone had done this to your child when they were 5, would you blame your child? And it's a shock to people when they think about it that way because they never have. But at that moment, that eye-opener gives me a foot in the door. And so I can start working with that. You're right. It takes decades. I won't even tell you how old I am. But you know what? I'm still recovering. I'm still healing. I'm still learning. It takes forever. And that's okay.
Well, I think what you just said, that's okay. I think that's an important aspect of what I try to impart upon my audience is that healing isn't linear.
Nope.
And it can take a long time, but I don't even like saying it that way because I think it's a lifelong recovery process.
Exactly.
Like you said, like learning. You can learn something new every day, and it's something I strive to do. What else can I learn? Yeah. And what more can I learn about this? But I think that's an important viewpoint that trauma victims, trauma survivors need to take is what can I learn to get past where I'm at? Exactly.
And my thing is a 12-step saying that I love, progress, not perfection.
I love that. Yeah.
I mean, quit worrying about being okay. Nobody out there is okay. Have you noticed the news lately? I mean, nobody's really okay.
If only we knew what was inside of other people's minds about themselves, it might change our perspectives about ourselves.
Exactly.
Right? Because we do. We have this built-in intuitive thought process that everybody's doing better than I am.
Exactly.
Look how much more successful they are. Look how much more able they are to handle crisis and stress and problems.
And it's just because we don't know what's going on behind the closed doors.
And the truth of the matter is they're no better off. Yeah.
Right. And they might be oblivious to it, but as you get to know more about the person, you can see. I had a friend who was a therapist, and he used to say to me when he had clients who would say stuff like that, like, oh, my neighbor never has problems like this, or blah, 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 blah. And he would say, well, do you want to be them? If they put their problems on the table and you put your problems on the table and you can see theirs and they can see yours, are you sure you'd be willing to trade? Because I guarantee you they have problems.
And maybe a whole lot more.
Worse. For example, I've had people say to me, well, my neighbor doesn't care if they hurt people's feelings. They just are worried about themselves, blah, blah, blah. We all know people like that. We all know people who don't seem to care about anyone but themselves. And frequently they're quite wealthy and they have nice things and whatever. I mean, it's shocking when you read about the psychological studies of CEOs and you find out that many of them are sociopaths.
It's true.
And so my question then is would you rather give up your compassion? Would you rather give up? Because if you're going to have those things, you need to be that person. And is that who you want to be?
Yeah, great point.
And so that's that awareness. Again, do I want to give up who I am to have those things? And like I said, I learned many years ago, even though I didn't feel like who I was had worth or meaning to other people, I was desperately protective of myself and fierce about my own feelings. I didn't share them with people, but by damn, they were mine, and I was not going to let people change how I was about caring in the world, about being in the world. I was not going to allow people to continue to victimize me. And you know, I don't even like the word victim, and I'll tell you why. Anyone can be victimized. Anyone. I don't care who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the presidents of the United States who've been assassinated or, shot or killed or whatever. They had all the protection in the world and it wasn't enough. Anyone can be victimized. Only we decide if we're victims. I mean, insofar as reporting something, you can say, yes, this person victimized 15 people, or there were 20 people who were victims of the blast, or whatever it is. Whether they remain victims is up to them. And I hate that helpless, hopeless idea that I'm a victim, which is why I don't share my story very much, not because I'm afraid to or it's painful, but because I don't see myself as a victim. Because I've had a lot of people ask me at different times, gosh, why don't you do this? It never occurs to me. I'm not a victim.
And in my capacity as a podcast host, dealing with people who've been raped or sexually assaulted or have experienced interpersonal violence, I refer to people that I talk to, the people that I address, as either victims or survivors, because some victims, even though they don't want to be victims, are stuck in the relationship and they are still recipients of horrific abuses and assaults and traumas.
Exactly.
But I think everyone who recognizes that and takes any sort of step towards getting away from that is a survivor. Sometimes victims are survivors.
They are. And I want to take that a step further.
Yeah.
When I've worked with clients and stuff in the past, especially groups, I love to work with groups because everybody learns so much from each other.
Mm-hmm.
We can all be victimized. Anyone can be a victim in that moment. If we remain there, we remain victims. If we allow that trauma to take hold of us. And we can't help it sometimes because we don't have the skills to not stay there. So there's that. And then the next step is survivor. I've survived this horrible attack. I'm a survivor of sexual trauma. I'm a survivor, which is powerful and brings back a lot of personal power. But there's a step beyond that. And it's called thriving.
Yes.
Am I a thriver? Or I'm always going to be a survivor where I am not allowing people to abuse me, but I haven't really made peace with how to incorporate that as a gift into my life. And that sounds awful to say, what happened to you can become a blessing. But you know what? Like I said, every moment is a teaching moment. There's a cost-benefit analysis. This horrible, horrible thing happened to me. Where is the gift within? How can it change my life? How can it make the world a better place?
Mm-hmm. So critical.
And whether you do that like me because you're crazy and you go out and start helping other people, or whether you do that because it changes who you are, makes you a better person, and impacts the people in your circles, either one, it makes you a thriver. You found the gold. And I think that that's a really important distinction. We can all be victimized, but we don't need to be victims. We can all be survivors. We don't have to remain victims. Or we can move up another step, find the gold, and thrive.
I love the way you've articulated all of that. And it makes me think about many, many of the guests that have been on this show who are survivors and thrivers who have said, I don't like being a member of this survivorhood group. Particularly comes to mind is these 4 women who actually are the ones who helped me get this podcast going in terms of them saying that I needed to do this. All 4 of them said in separate interviews, this is a sisterhood that I don't want anybody else to be a part of.
Exactly.
But I am so glad that I am a part of it with these people that I am with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning from them and I'm growing with them and they've inspired me to become a thriver.
Exactly.
As Jan Broberg puts it, a thriviver.
There you go.
She started a community.
I know Jan, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, we're not in touch anymore, but I used to be a neighbor.
That's awesome. Because of her abuse and what she'd gone through, she just a little over a year ago started an online community called Thrivivers.
That's wonderful. I love that.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense to me to hear thrivers, survivors who are thriving, talk about that I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through, but I'm going to use what I went through
to help others.
To help others and to become a better me.
And not only that, but when we choose that way of living, we're teaching wisdom to those around us that will prevent that from happening as much.
As much. See, I am a strong believer in what you just said, that we will never stop rape or sexual assault. There's no such thing as total prevention. Mm-mm. But there is such a thing as reducing the prevalence. And I think the way we reduce prevalence is by doing what you and I are doing right here. We're talking about the problem. Rape and sexual assault and interpersonal violence needs to become normalized in our conversations. We need to continue to look for pathways that help more people who are stuck in victimhood, who are stuck in the neuroscience aspect of what trauma can do to the brain.
Exactly.
There is healing, and that's why I wanted you here. I totally concur with everything you said. Laurie, it also makes me wonder, and I bring this up with every guest, and that is, now that you've talked about what trauma you've gone through, your mom, the physical abuses, the sexual abuse from brother, from the attempts by student colleagues, what that does to the brain is it brings it all to the forefront. And those implicit memories can be triggered, or a better word that I like to use, activated by our explicit memories when we talk about them. Are you willing to share with us what you personally do as a routine when you've brought up these horrific traumas and thoughts? How do you regulate that? How do you cope with that? And what are your routines, or what are your thought processes to de-escalate your own activation of trauma?
Okay, I have what I call the La Brea tar pits theory of recovery. This is something I use. One thing about trauma, when something bad happens to us, whether it's emotional, physical, and I also want to say, emotional trauma is just as devastating as sexual trauma.
Absolutely.
And it actually sets you up for sexual trauma.
Yeah.
In the future.
Sure
Like I said, you develop your little bunny hormones, and then predators sense them. If you're quiet, if you're shy because of what you've been through, and you pull back, and when you kind of sit on the fringes, the predators will scoop you right up.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's research that shows that. And the number one predictor that you're going to be raped or sexually assaulted is that you've been raped or sexually assaulted in the past.
Exactly.
And there is scientific evidence that shows exactly what you're talking about, that predators know how to hone in on vulnerable people.
Exactly. And all it takes is a lot of kindness initially. That's all it takes.
Yeah, kindness can be a tool.
That can be a negative tool in the wrong hands. But my La Brea tar pit goes like this.
Yes, let's talk about
If anyone knows about the La Brea tar pits, and I'm shocked how many people don't know about them, but in California, in La Brea, there are these ancient prehistoric tar pits that are still active and bubbling. And every so often, back in Paleolithic and prehistoric times, animals would fall into these tar pits. And the tar pits will suck you down just like quicksand. And it will pull these animals down into it, deep, deep, deep. And it dissolves everything except the bones. And as the bubbles and things that are coming from the depths of the earth come up, they will sometimes capture a bone and bring it to the surface. And it will pop on the top. And just out of the blue, surprisingly, there's bones in the tar pit all of a sudden. So in California, they have it fenced off, and they monitor it, and they watch for bones coming up, and it just pops and bubbles whenever it does. This is what trauma does. When it happens to us, we cannot cope with the range and the extent of the impact. We can't handle it. So to survive, which is our primary goal for our body wants us to survive no matter what.
Yep.
So what happens is, the trauma happens. It's just like a huge explosion on our mind, on our emotions. Our mind takes that trauma and throws it in the tar pit so that we can continue to move forward. So yes, we can be aware that this happened. It can cause a lot of surface shock. We can go into shock. We can quit talking. It does so many things to us. But believe me, that's only the tip of the iceberg. And what you're experiencing, as horrible as it is, isn't the full extent of what that trauma just did to you. And the way that you're getting through it is by surviving, by burying the rest. And our mind and our body are kind of funny because out of the blue, there doesn't even have to be a triggering event. Just one random day, a bubble will pop. With childhood abuse, here's what I find, and I teach this to families, to parents to understand. When the children go through trauma, especially children, they cannot process, they cannot rationalize, they cannot figure it out. And so it's buried. And it'll come up later in substance abuse or acting out or a lot of different things. You get your kid into a play therapist as quick as you can, and they will help process the surface of what's above the tar pit. And the child will do well for a while. And then as they get a little older and they become prepubescent or they hit puberty, another bubble will pop, I guarantee you, because their body starts changing and it brings up another bubble. And so then you go back into therapy. Just expect it. It's going to happen. And I'm talking from the woman's point of view right now, especially as I move forward. I mean, it happens with young men too. Okay, you've got your puberty all through your teens. Hormones are going crazy. Bubbles are popping. You don't know why. You don't know where. You just have these awful feelings. You don't understand them. So you go back into therapy for a while and you kind of get that smoothed over. And then there comes a time when you're going to commit in a relationship, whether that's getting married or whether that's moving in with someone or having regular sex or whatever it is, more bubbles will pop. And you might find yourself crying after a climax and your partner is shocked and horrified. Why are you sobbing? You just had a great time, I thought. These are those little La Brea tar pit bubbles coming up. And yeah, it might have been triggered by the sex, but you didn't expect it. You just had a great time. And now you're bawling your eyes out and you don't really know. You're just heartbroken. So again, another time to go seek some therapy to continue to heal. And then further on, when you hit menopause and your body starts to change again. Because the one thing that you know, buried deep in your brain, that you were taught as a child, that your body has value to others, all of a sudden that's not true anymore. You look in the mirror and there's nothing attractive there to the opposite sex. And even though you think you got that figured out, that body change is devastating or can be. And you might need to go back into therapy as you age. It's a fascinating thing, but those bubbles are there deep within us. We're not even aware of them. They are buried so deep. Now, if they're triggered by something, like we are reintroduced to another trauma, then it's like a pressure cooker. We've thrown all this stuff in the pressure cooker and screwed the lid on tight so it won't come out. But when something re-traumatizes us, it can blow the lid right off like an atomic bomb. That's what happens to our psyche when we can be re-traumatized or triggered. We can have that happen to us, which is devastating because all of a sudden you can't function at work, you can't function at home, you don't know what the hell's wrong with you, medication isn't working. So how I cope, coming back to the real question, I have some exercises and things that I do, but I do them on a daily basis. So it builds resiliency.
So whether you're activated or not, daily practice.
Daily things that I do. I have 2 crazy little dogs, and they love to chase bunnies, and they also are good couch potatoes. So I take my puggles out every morning, and we walk 2 or 3 miles. And we walk through the desert because being out in the wilderness heals me. And I'm old. I have arthritis. Everything hurts in the morning. But if I get up and I go walking with the dogs, I find that after I've put in about a mile, I start feeling much better. And my older dog, she's 16. She's the same way. She has arthritis in her shoulder. But after we've done about a mile, she's skippy and running and having a great time. And so we go out and we go hiking and we stop and take pictures of desert flowers and hummingbirds and whatever's out there. And I just realign with the beauty of the world. And that helps build my resilience.
Yeah.
Then I come home and I take about half an hour to fill the hummingbird feeders, fill the bird feeder, pick some weeds out of the garden, things like that, because It calms me, it soothes me. I'm focused on that. My brain is not out there running on its usual hamster wheel, and it builds resilience. It renews my calm. So then when I am triggered, it is easier for me to say, that was then, that's not now, that's not where you are, and to use a centering technique which pulls me back into the present so that I can continue forward. So that I'm very seldom caught with a full-on trigger response anymore because I have built some resilience. And if I don't do it on a daily basis, if I miss a weekend, if I take 4 days off for a holiday, it shows. I'm more irritable. I don't respond as calmly to things. It's a constant daily practice for my own emotional well-being. And just so everyone knows, I am on an antidepressant. One of the great things I got from my Scottish heritage, people in Scotland are in the rain a lot, in the dark a lot. And I think genetically, when you do studies, and there have been studies done, that places like Scandinavia, places like Scotland, Ireland, England, have a higher percentage of people who struggle with depression because their depression-fighting hormones have been pushed down for so long. They've been literally dampened by the bad weather because we need sunshine, we need exercise, we need all those things to get those positive hormones going. I suffer from depression, and several of my children suffer from depression. It's genetic. And so I'm on my medication, which keeps the day-to-day very manageable. I feel good. I have a lot of energy. I can do the things I want to do, and it helps me with my resilience. But if I'm not taking care of myself, and including things like staying hydrated, getting enough sleep, all those things that keep us healthy overall are vital to people who are recovering, because that's what builds your resilience bank. And then when something triggers you, you have an anchor that you can tie into and can help you with that. Yeah, that happened, but that's not what's happening now. And the meditation that I like to use involves a cognitive aspect. When it comes to traditional medication, I was never very good at it, and I realized long ago I was a lost cause. I could not clear my mind by simply choosing to clear my mind. My hamster wheel is very efficient, and it keeps running regardless. But what I learned was, if I can focus on something like gardening or walking the dogs, because I have to watch where I'm stepping, things like that, gets me into the present and the physical world. And that allows my mind to calm down. The hamster wheel stops. So my meditation is like a 4-step meditation. It's similar to a lot that are out there, but mine starts out with 3 deep breaths. In and out, slow, deep breaths, slowing your breathing, and then closing my eyes for a moment and taking note of what I can physically feel. Sunshine, temperature, wind speed, and then I start listening. What do I hear? Are my clothes comfortable? I just start combining all my senses so that I am utilizing every aspect of my physical self. And by seeking out sounds, by checking out how I feel, by giving my brain a mission, it shuts down the chatter naturally. I teach this to my clients. This whole meditation lasts maybe 4 or 5 minutes. It can last longer than that. Once you've practiced it for a while, like I have, I can step outside the door, take a quick 5-minute break, close my eyes, lean against the building, breathe a little bit, and I'm there. I'm okay. And I can step right back into whatever it is I need to do. And that's really effective. I advise people you can do this anytime, any place. Please don't do it while you're driving.
Laurie, that makes perfect sense. And I love that you shared that with us because I think it is so important. And the part that I like the best is what you said towards the end when you said, I do this so often. It's kind of been integrated into your lifestyle that now you don't even think about it.
Exactly.
And you go into these coping mechanisms, these meditations, these thought processes just as a way of life. I think the intriguing aspect to me is what you said about that building resilience.
It does.
And so then when those activators come along, our body is better prepared to deal with them.
Exactly.
If a new trauma comes along, I think that even probably is impacted. I've also read some recent research that says that people can actually avoid post-traumatic stress disorder if within the first 3 months after that trauma, especially within the first 24 to 48 hours after the trauma, they're treated with empathy and kindness and made to feel safe. The majority of people who go through even severe traumas, if they're treated that way, bypass post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah. Added to that is an awareness that people who are naturally highly resistant, and they are out there, God bless them, I'm not one, but there are people who are, thank God and hurrah,
Yeah.
There are people out there who just are naturally highly resilient. And yes, they can be standing right next to the same person who's horribly traumatized in an event, and they'll be okay. Because they realize this is an encapsulated event, this isn't part of my daily life, and they're able to move forward. They don't take responsibility, they don't see themselves as victims, but the person who is fragile and doesn't have a lot of resistance and resilience is definitely going to have a lot more trauma. And yeah, if they're treated well and worked with a little bit, as you said, even informally,
Made to feel safe.
If the EMTs that are on the scene first, if the police that they're talking to, if the first responders who are there for them are really there for them, they do so much better. This is the thing that hurts me, because for years I walked around with this assumption that, well, yeah, they're first responders. They should know this. And a lot of them don't. They're so busy treating the physical that the rest is beyond them. And I've witnessed it in emergency rooms. I've witnessed this over and over again. And it's not because they don't care, it's because they don't know.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm so excited that that's starting to be recognized, that more and more health clinics are having social workers there to help patients work through things when they're faced with a devastating diagnosis, or they come in with something that's more than medical. They have social workers in ERs. They have social workers now on some police teams.
Yeah.
And it's awesome, because it's not the one social worker who's just doing everything. Everything the social worker does, the team learns from watching that happen. And then the team is more responsive.
Yeah, they can back that up.
Exactly, because they see it working.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing.
Laurie, I can already tell I want you back on this show. We could talk all day because there's so much that I have questions about. I would love to have you back and talk about this some more.
I would love to come back.
I so appreciate you being here today. I appreciate you being as open and transparent and raw and real as you are. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you for inviting me. It was fun, and I look forward to coming back.
That would be great. Thanks, Laurie.
Okay.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I feel honored to have had this opportunity to have such an insightful and helpful conversation with Laurie McBride. Thank you, Laurie, for your time and for openly sharing your story and experiences with us. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show in the future. I also want to thank each of you for listening into this podcast. If this is your first time as a SAS listener, welcome. And for those of you who tune in regularly, thank you for continuing to be a part of this community. Whether you're a first-time listener or tune in regularly, please share this podcast with everyone you know and help this show continue to grow and reach others. The impact this show is having on this audience is helping in bringing hope and encouragement to thousands of victims and survivors who rely on this show for help in their healing journey. It's also providing a trauma-informed education on the best practices of interviewing survivors who've endured the horrendous and devastating impact of rape and sexual assault to those in the criminal justice, advocacy, and mental health fields. So please continue to share this podcast with everyone you come in contact with. Everyone can benefit from listening to this show. Also, please remember to start by believing when it comes to listening to and supporting victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.